Tomorrow it's 55, so who knows. So I want to officially welcome you this morning. I see a lot of familiar faces and I'm delighted you have joined us. If I have not met you, I am Kathy Thompson, Senior Executive Vice President, and I've actually been at the bank. I celebrated my 25 years last year. So talk about somebody that doesn't jump around or change jobs much. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce our first speaker, Alex Say. He graduated from the University of Evansville, University of Louisville School of Law, great, my alma mater. And Alex has over 20 years of experience in the banking financial industry. He was in-house counsel for a large foundation. He works with many of our clients on business succession planning, estate planning, kind of that holistic what we do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Alex Say, and his topic is the tax law changes. What does it mean to me? So please welcome Alex Say.
All right, thank you, Kathy. So we're all here today because it's the most exciting season of the year, and that's tax season, right? How many guys have already looked at taxes and go, I am so happy to be in middle of March? All right, so we all know we had some big tax law changes this year. Doesn't affect the returns we're preparing now, but it's going to affect your returns going forward. So what I'm going to do today is just give you guys about 10 minutes of highlights of the tax law changes that we have in effect for 2018 going forward. This is not a comprehensive review, it's not a down-depth detailed review, it's just the highlights. So if there's something in there that you think can affect you, it gives you the opportunity to go talk to your CPA, talk to your advisor at Stockyards, and say, all right, how is this going to affect me? So what I wanted to do is just kind of individual, start out with just some of the rate changes. When you look at the rate changes, not huge changes. Where you're going to see the biggest difference is right in here. You're going to see a 3% reduction here, a 3% reduction in this tax bracket, and a 4% down here. We've got another 2.6% reduction for people over 500,000. But the biggest change is right in the middle of the bracket, sort of from about 38,000 to about 200,000 of income for single filers. What does it mean if you're married? You've got some more changes. Again, these are right in the middle. You've got a 3% reduction starting from 19 to 77,000. You got another 3% reduction if you're 77 to 165, and another 4% reduction at 165 to 315. So those are the biggest changes in the brackets overall. The other changes that we see is capital gains. There aren't any. Your capital gains rates are still going to be 0, 15, and 20. You can see the breakdown if you're married filing jointly. 0% on capital gains if you're up to 77,000, 75 to 479, 15%, 20% over $479,000. So for those of you with investable assets, so you're looking, really no changes from the capital gains rate standpoint. Alternative minimum tax. How many people here have been hit with alternative minimum tax before and said that is completely unfair? All right, well, a little bit of changes. So the exemption amount for the new law will increase to $70,000 for single filers, $109,000 for joint filers. The biggest change is it phases out. It used to phase out at $160,000. Now it's going to phase out between $500,000 and $1 million. But one of the keys here is these changes are going to end after 2025. All right, a lot of these individual tax law changes fall back. We got a window of 2025 where Congress is going to have to do something. Are they going to extend them? Are they going to repeal them? What are they going to do? So we're in a scheme like we saw from 2001 through 2010. Is what's going to happen in 2025? Nobody knows at this point. All right, so next, standard deduction. This is a pretty big change for a lot of people. You had a standard deduction previously, married filing jointly, of $12,700. The standard deduction now is going to increase to $24,000 for joint filers. Again, the deduction, though, ends in 2025. All right, personal exemptions. This is another change in here. Before we had $4,050 per person. So basically a married couple with 2 dependents would have a personal exemption of $16,200. Personal exemption is now eliminated. All right, it's no longer, there are no personal exemptions that you can take on the return. Child tax credit, that's actually going up. It was about $1,000 per child. It's going up to $2,000 per child, with the first $1,400 being refundable, which means people could get a refund even if their tax liability is kept below zero. All right. Again, the cutoff for the tax credit increases from $110,000 to $400,000, but it expires again in 2025. State and local tax deductions. This is the big one. This is the one that created a lot of hoopla, particularly on the East Coast and West Coast, but it creates a lot of issues for people here in Louisville as well. Because what you had, you've got state and local property and real estate taxes, state and local income taxes and sales taxes. So that deduction now is capped at $10,000. All right, so when you think about just your property tax alone on your home, and you start adding all the other state and local taxes in there with a $10,000 cap, there may be some deductions that you were taking previously you're not going to be able to take any longer. Charitable deductions, no major changes on the charitable deductions other than if you're making cash donations. You used to be limited to 50% of AGI. You now can increase that to 60% of AGI. Mortgage deductions, there's quite a few changes here. Well, not a few, but there's some changes here. Before, you could deduct interest on mortgage debt up to $1.1 million, and that included interest on up to $100,000 on a home equity line. So now, for current mortgage holders, there's no change. You're grandfathered in. But the deductible limit drops to $750 for new mortgages after December 31, 2017. And this is the big one, home equity lines. You used to be able to deduct the interest on a home equity line. You're not going to be able to claim that deduction any longer. So how many people here used to go out and buy a car using a home equity line saying, I get to deduct the interest on that? No more. All right? Medical expense deductions. This is an odd one. I'm not sure how this got in this way, but before you had deduction for medical expenses that exceeded 10% of AGI. Now, for 2017 and 2018 only, you get to deduct medical expenses that exceed 7.5% of AGI, but it goes back to 10% in 2019. So I'm not sure who came up with that one. Little odd in the whole grand scheme of things. The next one may affect some of you that have pay investment advisory fees. All right. Up until now, you could deduct your investment advisory fees to the extent they exceeded 2% of your AGI as part of your miscellaneous itemized deductions. All right. This deduction is repealed through the 2025 tax year, so you're no longer having a deduction for investment advisory fees. Alimony deductions. The only reason I can think of this one in here is there have to be some congressmen that are planning on getting divorced in 2019, and they're planning on their spouses paying them some alimony. Because what's happened here is before, the person paying the alimony got to take a deduction on their return for the amount of alimony they paid, and the person receiving the alimony paid tax on the alimony payments they received. That's not going to be anymore. For divorces after December 31, 2018, there will be no alimony tax deduction for the payor spouse. So whoever is paying the alimony will pay 100% of the tax on those alimony payments. What I predict you're going to see on divorces after 2018, you're going to see a lot more property settlements rather than alimony payments. All right, limits on itemized deductions. So there used to be a limit on itemized deductions, and then you got phased out at $313,000. There are no limits anymore on itemized deductions. The individual mandate penalty, the Obamacare tax. We had a lot of noise about that as they went through the different iterations of the tax law. So basically, under Obamacare, there was the individual mandate that said if you don't have health insurance, you get a penalty tax. After December 31st, 2018, okay, that's not beginning January 1, December 31, 2018, there is no responsibility for the individual mandate tax. All right, so the kitty tax. For those of you that have investable assets that are maybe owned by children, before that net unearned income of qualifying children was taxed at the parents' rate. Now that is the ordinary capital gains rate is applicable to trusts and estates applied to the unearned income of a child. All right, that's a change because what happens on trusts and estates, you reach the top bracket at a little over $12,000 of income. So that's a big change if you've got children, grandchildren that are subject to the kitty tax. 529s, for those of you with children or grandchildren, there's a little change to 529 plans, and what that is, it allows you to make $10,000 per year in distributions for public, private, and elementary and secondary schools. Up until now, 529s we used for college expenses. You can now use them for primary and secondary school expenses. All right, estate and gift tax. Who remembers the good old days when we had a $600,000 exemption? It was not that long ago, all right? 8 years ago, we went to a $5 million exemption. We now have an $11.2 million exemption per person, $22.4 million for a married couple. Generation skipping taxes in place to $11.2 million. So what does that mean for most people? You don't have to worry about taxes on your estate planning. What you have to focus on is family issues, family dynamics, and protection of your assets and their inheritance. However, the levels are going to expire in 2025. So what happens in 2025? We fall back to the $5 million per person. So there needs to be some planning inside your documents. If you anticipate having an estate that goes over 11.2, and additionally, if you're having a joint estate over $10 million, you need to have planning for the levels over 2025. What do I think personally? I don't think it's probably going to change because we've never seen them lower that estate tax exemption, but it gives Congress something to argue about. All right, annual exclusion gifts. We've gone from $14,000 a year per person to $15,000 a year per person. But what we've done is changed the index for inflation. Rather than the traditional CPI, we've now gone to what's called the change CPI. What that effectively is a slower paced CPI index. So the rate of inflation on that index is much lower than the traditional CPI, so those increases are not going to come as fast. All right, corporate taxes. I'm just quick highlight on corporate taxes. Previously, top corporate rate was 35%. Top corporate rate now is going to be 21%, and the corporate AMT is going to be repealed. All right, so what does this mean? You guys have all seen it in the news. Mark's probably going to be talking about it a little bit. What effect this has on the economy, because it's going to mean there's a lot more availability of cash inside companies, and what are they going to do with it? Pass-through business taxes. For those of you involved with LLCs, pass-through business taxes, those business income used to pass through to you. It still passes through to you, but now you're going to get to take a 20% deduction on your pass-through business income, but there are limits of $157,000 as single and $315,000 as a married. So those are just the highlights. I know I just wanted to give you 10 minutes, briefings. If there's something in there that piqued your interest, catch me afterwards. Go talk to your CPA. Go talk with your advisor at Stockyards. But I wanted to make sure that in this tax season, you guys are aware that we do have changes coming. All right, so thank you.
So Beth Landon is here today with Legacy Capital. Lots of years of experience on advising families on transferring wealth. So her topic today is living your legacy, where money, values, and family interest intersect. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Kathy. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning with you. And as Kathy said, we are going to talk a little bit about what some people refer to as the softer side of wealth planning. So our firm, Legacy Capitals, has been in partnership with Oppenheimer, and we have been doing a lot of work with financial advisors. Typically, we work with both families of means as well as financial advisors. And our goal is to educate and empower families to be financially successful across generations, to thrive and prosper across generations. So this is something that requires a little bit more than the traditional financial planning as you think about it. So I'm going to be here today to introduce to you a new way of thinking about, a more holistic way of thinking about financial planning. All right. What I want to start with is just giving you a broader definition of what legacy really means. So I went to a dictionary for that. This is from the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English. Never heard of it before in my life. In fact, I think it's a Queen's English. I think it's British. Maybe it's Canadian. I don't know. My colleague over here. However, it said exactly what I wanted you to hear, so I grabbed this one. So legacy. First definition. Money or property that you receive from someone after they die. And that's a pretty traditional explanation. So inheritance. She received this little legacy from her aunt. So I looked at the second one. Something that happens or exists as a result of things that happened at an earlier time. The invasion left a legacy of hatred and fear. No, wait, that's not what I wanted. Let's look at the next one. This one works. He is beginning, ever so slowly, to think about the legacy he has built for himself. So that is where I want you to kind of have your mind going as we look at this. I think as opposed to something that gets passed along or winning the lottery, this is something about what do you want to leave behind as your legacy. All right. We start out talking about a model, we call this a value graph. If you look at the first circle, this is what is traditional about financial planning. Here's a group of people, perhaps the family, in a room with a financial advisor, sitting around a conference table. They're talking about the technical aspects of wealth. The second is what we call the kitchen table conversation. So our objective is to move up. When we work with advisors, we try to move them up the scale. When we work with families, this is about getting farther up this value graph. Because the farther up you get up this graph, the more meaningful your wealth planning will be. Around the kitchen table, we talk about things that are important to the family that have to do more with their business, their estate planning, prenups even. And again, there is a technical side to that. And where we'd like to think about this is going to this next level. And the next level is what we call the things that keep you up at night. And I'll give you an example of a family that I worked with years ago. The father was an entrepreneur, the mother was a budding artist, and they had 2 adult children. The daughter was about to get married, and she was marrying a fellow they really, really liked. The problem was he didn't come from a wealthy family. They were very protective, they were talking about prenups. Their son, the father in particular, really liked this son. He was a hardworking guy, got out of college. He was out doing ranching somewhere out west as sort of a thing until he went to grad school. And the father was just so sure he'd given up Goldman Sachs to do ranching, but he knew that his next step was business school. So we started talking about this, and I started and literally went to that kitchen table, the second little conversation with them. I met with them. I was working for a family office at the time, so this is not an unusual thing for a family office. And I was invited to stay at the guest house, at their house, down in Florida. So I stayed at the guest house. We had that kitchen table conversation at 6:30 in the morning. Because that serial entrepreneur got up at 4:30, so by 6:30 he was hungry and it was getting a little late for him, and that was fine. So I met with the husband and the wife, and we started those conversations. And with the questions that I posed to them, as their advisor at the time, I got much closer to getting at what the heart of the matter was. What do you want for your children in the long run? How do you want to be remembered? What are the things you care about most? They talked about their philanthropy. What's important to you? Let's look at the philanthropy. Have you thought about bringing your kids into the philanthropy? Well, the son-in-law, we weren't sure. We don't really want to talk about the money, but we want to include him somehow and make him feel welcome to the family. Let's look at the philanthropy. What's important there? And so the end result of that is we got to a lot of things that were keeping them up at night on the right hand of this, and we were able to move forward in very positive ways. Out of that, we created a family meeting where they talked about philanthropy, included not only their son and daughter, but the son-in-law to be, as he came into the family, helping them decide about the philanthropy and learning more about the family through their values, through what mattered to them in terms of philanthropy. All right, I'm going to take a step back, and I'd like to show you a short video which helps to set the stage, I think, for some of the other things I'm going to talk about.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table, do a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick.
Okay, I'm going to ask you now, how did they do that? Anybody know how they did the trick? If you've seen this before, please don't say anything. Have an idea of how they did it? Okay, no volunteers. All right, well, let's have a look and see what happened. Did you notice anything else that struck you as odd or different about this when you were watching? You should get a hand. Yes. The back screen changed. Interesting. See anybody else say that? Anything else? All right, well, let's take a look and let's see how they did the card trick.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table, do a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick.
The first time I saw the explanation of that, I kept waiting for them to do something with that gorilla in the background. Never happened. Why would I show this video? So the reason is because sometimes things can happen in plain sight and you don't notice them. That's called change blindness, phenomena in visual perception in which very large changes occurring in full view in a visual scene are not noticed. So when we work with advisors, and we showed this when we were in Stock Yards, we showed this video and talked to advisors about it and said, what might you be missing? And the answer we got was, in a holistic sense, so if we're working with a family, and if we only focus on the financial aspects of their planning, we might really miss something about this family, where they want to go, where they're heading, what's important to them. So we know how important it is to focus on those softer things, as Kathy said, in addition to just the financial. And by the same token, with families, if you are doing your planning and you're going into your financial advisor, and that's your primary advisor, and you're only looking at the numbers and not looking beyond that, and not willing to open up, then you're going to be missing something. And with your family, if you're not going to look at what's important to you, where you're headed, then you might be missing something that's really valuable to you as a family. All right. So we'd like to introduce the concept here then of legacy planning. And I'll just go ahead and read this. I don't know if you can see it in the back. Most planning is focused on preparing the assets for the family. So a lot of conversations about the money and where it's going and tax impact and that all those conversations are absolutely necessary and are what they should be. However, historically, very little planning has been done about preparing the family for the assets. And we're facing here right now with $30 billion worth of assets over the next 30 to 40 years are going to transfer to the next generation. And when you think about that, that's pretty phenomenal. There are going to be a lot of people who need to be prepared for those assets. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and why that's important. Do you know how many generations wealth stays in families? So the big answer is already up here. 3. And actually, this is really interesting to me because it's not just in the United States. All around the globe, this is a phenomenon. So in Italy, they say from stalls to stars to stalls again. In China, they say wealth never lasts beyond the third generation. In Japan, it's rice paddies to rice paddies in 3 generations. So it's not just here. And the statistics are pretty interesting. So 100% by G2, generation 2, 30% of the wealth is remaining, and 10% by the 3rd generation. And I don't know if you're thinking as I am, as that money flows out, what else might be missing? Relationships within the family, entrepreneurial spirit, life purpose. So there are things that are not as tangible, not as easy to count as that money in the percentages here, but things that are really important that are also being left out. And there's some more statistics. Why does that happen? So you would think, okay, so we just had a nice update on taxes. Is this taxes that impact money that's being transferred? Bad planning, bad estate planning? No. 85% is due to the things that we call the soft side. 60% due to breakdown of communication and trust within the family unit. 25% due to heirs being unprepared for their money. So when we work with families, we call this the business of being family. And it's very important. Top concerns of the wealthy. I know it's a small print. This may come as no surprise to you, because these are the things that keep you up at night. The legacy that I leave for my children or grandchildren is the top one, along with raising financially responsible children. Using my wealth to help others, financing the education of my children or grandchildren, and then it starts to get a lot lower. Having someone to care for me in my old age, and then leaving my wealth to worthwhile causes after I pass away. So those aren't particularly technical. Many of them require some technical planning and thought behind them, but it really points out to me that those are the things that, again, what keeps you up at night? It's the softer side that families really worry about when it comes to the impact of wealth on themselves and planning for their children. And by the way, the wealthier you get, the more complex those wealth decisions become. I think that, again, comes as no surprise to you. So for us, we talk about not just legacy in that future tense, but legacy today. How do you want to be remembered? It's not about leaving a legacy then, but living a legacy. And this little gravestone is kind of silly. When I die, I want to be my grave dog for free Wi-Fi so that people come and visit me. That's pretty empty. I don't think that's what you really want. And I wanted to share a couple things with you. I recently watched a video, and it was actually of a commencement ceremony by that famous American philosopher, Denzel Washington. In the commencement speech, the thing that he really started out with for these young graduates really rang true for me. You've never seen a U-Haul following a hearse. Let me repeat that. You've never seen a U-Haul following a hearse. You can't take it with you. You really can't take it with you. What's so important is to be intentional about what you're doing during your lifetime. and communicating that again to the next generations and thinking about what's important for your life. It's how we live each moment of every day. One of the things we used to talk about in workshops was, think of a celebrity who may have ruined their legacy or their reputation, and they're still alive and they have to live with that. And we struggle to come up with one or two. Well, over the last few months post-Lionsgate, I can't use that anymore. So, I have something I found by Googling that I wanted to share with you that I thought you'd think was fun. It's about the Smith family. So the Smith family was really excited, wanted to share some stories with their kids and their grandkids, and they discovered that their ancestors came over on the Mayflower. That is worth it. They started doing the family research. A lot of fun for them. So they said, you know what? We are going to hire an author, and we are going to have a little book made about our family that we can share and leave behind for our kids and our grandkids, and that is an incredible legacy. So with a little more research, they were really startled to find out that great-uncle Clarence was not someone that they would necessarily want to have reflected in a children's storybook. Because Uncle Clarence had been executed in the electric chair for committing murder. Obviously that was very hush-hush, no one knew. So they went to the author of this book and they voiced their concerns and said, we don't know what to do. We can't X him off the family tree. The kids have already seen the family tree. They like the name Clarence, thought it was neat. What do we do? And the author was very thoughtful about it and said, I think I can handle this tactfully. So when they read the proof of that book, this is what they read. By the way, part of this for me is telling me that it's really almost impossible to undo a bad living legacy. But we're going to try it, and we've seen it done sometimes, but here we go. This is how it read. Great-uncle Clarence occupied a chair of applied electronics at an important government institution. He was attached to his position by the strongest of ties, and his death came as a great shock. All right, so moving right along. How'd you like that? I want you to think about your traditional multi-generational planning and add another little piece of pie to the pie, and that is legacy planning. On top of investment planning, estate planning, tax planning, risk management planning, and those things that you would normally look at. I would say, first, think about your system of, and I call it an ecosystem, of family advisors. You have your financial advisor. You work closely with stockyards, you wouldn't be here probably. You have your tax accountant. You have your estate planning attorney or your estate planning guidance person. And recognize that all of these people are on the same team, your team. And to really get at where you want to go, what's important for you, it's really important to be meeting with these folks at least once a year. And what I would recommend, I'm talking about having them meet together. So meet with your family, you're going to come up with what's important to you, then you're going to meet with this extended team. It's your ecosystem, and think of it that way, because the more that you can work on this legacy planning piece of the pie, the more you're going to find that your legacy will reflect your beliefs and what you want for your next generation. Now, I have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to breeze through some things fairly quickly. So as you look at that piece of pie, I want you to start thinking of things a little differently. So the questions that you might have asked before were, how are my investments doing? Still keep asking that question. But what is the magic number to retire? How can I minimize the tax impact to my estate? All valid questions, but add to those these 5. How do I ensure a happy and fulfilled life for myself and my family? How do I transfer my wealth to my children and others I care about? How do I prepare the next generation in my family for opportunities and responsibilities of wealth? How do I best give and share my resources with others? And how do I ensure that my family business, whatever that business of being a family is, flourishes? And by flourishes, I mean beyond generations. You have resources beyond just those financial resources or financial capital. And we use what we call the fishes model. And the hand is up here so you can, whoop, there we go. There it is. So those resources or capitals are, and they're very interdependent, financial capital, which you would imagine to be net worth or assets, intellectual capital, education, experience, and wisdom. And that's a lot of the preparation when you think about financial planning and explaining that to the next generation. But also, I want you to think of that in terms of things like building grit, resilience, having work experience, worldliness, common sense. The third one is social capital, the S. You may have impressive social networks. So that is getting outside of the family, the quality of the relationships you build there, but also understand that sometimes these relationships can be strained by wealth and by thoughts about wealth. Human, that has to do with the interests, passions, skills, gifts, and internal wiring of each person, which is going to be different. So as you look at your family, understand that not everyone in the family thinks alike or may even want the same things. And then finally, something that we call spiritual capital. Whether you are not a religious person, that includes your values, your purpose in life, your faith, and service or outreach to others. So family wealth decisions should be made with all of these in mind. I'm going to do a couple minutes quickly here on preparing the next generation, and then I'm going to step off the stage. This little girl has her finger over her mouth. I grew up in a household where we didn't talk about the money. That is a very, very dangerous thing, not to talk about the money. And I would, because you can leave intended heirs without a purpose, without a plan. And I would also encourage you in talking to your children to know that even if you're not talking to them, there are things that they see by the examples that you set, by the lifestyle you live, and excuse me, you're all examples by how you live. But it is very important to talk to your children about the wealth that they're going to receive. And you don't have to start with the dollar signs. You don't really have to talk about the money. You can talk about your family values, about what's important to you, about your family philanthropy, always a good place to start. And remember, also, there's a child here, but the next generation isn't necessarily a child. It could be millennials who think very differently than if the next generation for you could be in their 40s or even their 50s, and you're thinking of passing money along. But they need to know. They need to know what your intentions are, and they need to know what your plan is, so they aren't guessing. All right, and as I mentioned, philanthropy is a great place to start. I'm going to close by just saying that I hope you found some inspiration in this, and I hope that when your financial advisor opens up to you and asks questions and says, this is a transition in your life, or your kids are heading off to college, is this a good time to be talking to them about your financial planning, your life, and where you want this family to head? It's a great time to open up and start working with them as a holistic advisor. Thank you.
I'm just pleased to introduce Mark Holloway.
Thank you, Kathy. This is our 23rd annual economic seminar. And I ask this every year, who's been to all 23? Is there anybody? Besides Kathy and I. Nobody. Who was at our economic seminar last fall? Lots of hands, okay. Well, if you do 23 of these things, you get some traditions that get associated with them. And one of the traditions that I kind of stuck with all my public speaking is making it interactive. And the reason I make these things interactive is it tells me whether you all think we're off in the weeds someplace or whether what we're saying makes intuitive sense. I believe you as business people and investors know as much about what's going on in the economy as all of the government statisticians put together. So we're going to be interactive with this speech, and you have to participate. You know how I am. I need the feedback. The second tradition is the naming of the speech. I've always tried to come up with a cute name for the speech, and this year's name is 40 Years of Minding the Markets. And that gives you a clue of something I'm going to talk about. I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I've learned in the 40 plus years that I've been in this business that you can use personally in your day-to-day investing and that we use at Stockyards Bank when we're doing security selection. I'm also going to talk about the outlook for the economy and the capital markets in 2018. And I'm also going to address some of the volatility that we've experienced here recently. The volatility is something that's been unnerving to a lot of customers, a lot of you individually, I'm sure. So we're going to try and address that and put it in perspective. So let's get interactive right away. Who thinks the economy is going to get better in 2018? Lots of hands. Wow, that's good. Who thinks that short-term interest rates are going to go up this year? Lots of hands. Well, the Federal Reserve has kind of promised that. In fact, the new Federal Reserve chairman spoke to Congress last week, and he hinted at possibly 4 rate increases in 2018, and the markets didn't like that very much. Everybody's expecting 3. And I will tell you, I serve on an interest rate committee at the bank, and we were at the main office meeting this Wednesday, and we always look at Fed funds futures. And the futures contracts for Fed funds indicate that we're going to get an increase this month when the Fed meets. And there's an 85% chance that they're going to raise again in June, according to the futures contracts. Who thinks long-term rates are going to go up as well? Lots of hands again. Okay. Who thinks that we're going to have a positive return from the stock market this year? Not as many hands. It's good. I don't like consensus on things. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the economy. Regardless of what you think of our new president personally, some of his economic policies are working. This is the first president we've had in a long time that realizes that the source of growth in our economy doesn't come from the government. It comes from businesses, large and small, and from people like you and I going out and spending money. In fact, you've heard me say over and over, that's 2/3 to 3/4 of our economy, us going out and spending money. President Trump has surrounded himself with people that actually believe that faster economic growth is going to cure a lot of our economic ills, but it also could cure a lot of our social ills. So everything that they have done is designed to do 2 things. Make it easier for business to do things like hire people and build new plants and to upgrade existing equipment and spend money, and for you and I to have more money in our pocket. So this combination of these 4 points that Trump is using to try and do all of that, tax cuts, repatriation of overseas profits, regulatory reform, and infrastructure spending are all designed to do that. Put more money in businesses' pockets and in your pockets. So, is it working? Yes, I think it is. We have had, for the first time in a decade, back-to-back-to-back quarters of over 2.5% growth after we have, I think I just turned it on. There we go. After we have limped along, we're the bottom blue line in this recovery from the last recession at around a 2% growth rate. 2% growth rate's not bad, but normally when we come out of a recession as severe as the one we had in 2008, we should be experiencing 3 to 4% type growth. The good thing about this is it's been durable. In fact, if we go on and do not have a recession in 2018, this will be the longest recovery on record since World War II. So, what gave us that better growth? What were the things that contributed to the last 3 quarters being close to 3% type growth? Well, the first thing was better global growth. We finally got a lot of countries kicking on all cylinders. Europe, which had seemed to be on the brink of a recession forever, with all the problems in Italy and Spain and some of the other major players in the European Union, seems to be on track to have a pretty good year this year, and had a pretty good year last year. Japan, which seemed to be slipping back and forth into recession, had a pretty good year last year and looks like it's going to have a pretty good year this year. Underdeveloped markets seem to be doing very well. And some of the bigger sort of developing markets like India and China and Russia, all are doing pretty well right now. How did that help us? Well, global growth is really good for trade, and trade is a big part of our economy. So the demand for U.S. consumer goods and the demand for U.S. products and services goes up when global growth goes up, and that helps our economy. Tax reform. Alex talked a lot about the tax changes for individuals. The press has kind of downplayed the tax reform side of things here. They didn't like that very much. I will tell you that it is a very, very big deal. Who here is working and saw a little increase in their paycheck on February 1st when the new withholding tables went into effect? Again, Trump trying to do something designed to put more money in your pocket so that you'll go out and do what we do best as consumers, and that's consume, spend money. It's a very big deal on the corporate side as well. It's a big deal for Little Stockyards Bank. Small businesses got probably the biggest tax cut of all, and they're probably the biggest hirers of all. So that was a very positive thing for small business. Large business got a tax cut, plus they get to repatriate those overseas dollars. And the hope is that all of that money is going to flow into new plant, new equipment, upgrading computers and software systems, and hiring more people, spending money, making the economy grow. So the corporate tax deal, I think, is very, very big, and it's not something that's just going to affect 2018. It's going to be in effect for a long, long time, and it's going to make corporations in the United States much more competitive on a world stage, and I think that's one of the reasons that the market did so well in the fourth quarter and in January, is because investors were anticipating an increase in corporate profits that was a result of these tax law changes. Make sense? I like it when everybody nods. Thank you. Corporate profits. Mentioned corporate profits briefly, but corporate profits are kind of going through the roof. If you were at our seminar in October, one of the things I was worried about was the valuation level on the U.S. stock market. It was trading around 22 or 23 times estimated earnings for the S&P 500. That has sort of self-corrected. The increase in anticipated corporate profits has fixed that. And now we're only trading, if you look at PE ratios, price divided by earnings, the earnings side of the equation went up and the valuation went down. That made us trade at a valuation level that's more like 17 or 18 times earnings, which is much more normal for our stock market. And corporate profits are very important because corporate profits get plowed back into the system, just like your spending does as well. Big part of all of this has been employment. There have been some huge employment gains in our country over the last year or so. In fact, many economists would consider our current unemployment rate, which is around 4%, to be full employment. And the reason they think that is because 4% generally of the population is either in transition or unemployable at any point in time. So full employment is a big deal, again, because it puts money in people's pockets that they can spend. And spending is such a huge part of our economy. I expect the employment picture to continue to improve and that participation rate that everybody was talking about over the last several years to increase. People are re-entering the workforce. And it's probably a good thing because we started to see a little bit of wage price inflation. So more on that in just a little bit. Housing. Who here has tried to buy a house in the last year? Housing is very tight, particularly in the Louisville market. We've only got about a 1 month supply of houses. And going into a very busy season, we normally have 3 or 4 months supply of listed homes. Housing is that way, I think, all over the United States right now. Housing prices are going up. Almost every measure of housing looks better. Housing is not a huge portion of our economy, but it affects so many other industries. Everything from carpeting to insurance, it's affected by positive housing market. And again, that puts more people to work, that puts more money in paychecks. If you buy a house, generally you do some renovations, do some painting even, that's all positive for the economy. This proposed economic stimulus plan, also a very big deal. This is the a la Obama side of things. It's all designed to incent companies to do work for the government to repair bridges, roads, and dams, and hire people to do the work, so that people will get paychecks and people will spend money and people will stimulate the economy. And finally, I think all these things have really made consumer and business confidence really soar through the roof. And this is a big deal. I think you're seeing it in spending, and you're particularly spending it on the consumer side, where we are experiencing the highest level of consumption that we've experienced in about 10 years. That combination of tax breaks, the employment picture, and household wealth going up, the value of your home going up, is something that's stimulated consumer spending to a big degree. And I think this chart shows it pretty easily. So those are the things that are driving this economy right now, and I think they're probably going to continue for a while. Make sense? Let's talk a little bit about the capital markets. And we're going to talk about common stocks first. We believe that we're in a secular bull market for stocks, in spite of all the volatility that we've experienced recently. Well, what does that mean? It means that the general trend on the market is up, and that as we have these corrections, the new lows in the market are higher than the old ones, and as we bounce back, the new highs are higher than the old ones. So the general trend of the market is up. In fact, little dance one here. You can see the trend since 2008, after the big correction in the market, seems to be that channel continues to go up. We'll get back to this slide in a second. Some recurring themes here on why the stock market is continuing to do well. Well, the first is that stronger global economic growth. We have a lot of multinational corporations in the United States. They are experiencing increases in revenues as a result of this overseas strength that we're experiencing and the sales that they're having over there. And that's driving corporate profits, and that's causing the market to do pretty well. Low bond yields. How does that help the stock market? Well, even at 2.6% on that 5-year treasury, I have a hard time buying that as opposed to a high-quality stock. This level of interest rate doesn't provide any competition for people who have new money to invest. They're probably going to go towards the stock market as opposed to the fixed income markets. Productivity gains are taking place right now, and I think it's one of the reasons we haven't seen an increase in inflation, because productivity kind of offsets inflation to some degree. I mentioned valuations earlier. Our market seems to be trading in a fairly reasonable valuation now as opposed to where it was last fall when we did this conference. So we'll talk a little bit more about valuations when I talk about the experiences that I've had in the 40 years of being in this business. Positive cash flow usage. Corporations and corporate managers have become very good at trying to appease shareholders. And they do this by using excess cash flow to do things like increase dividends and buy back stock. And that increases the value of your ownership position. And increasing dividend yield is important, and your ownership increases as they buy back stock. Corporate profit growth. Probably the single biggest thing affecting the stock market right now. Corporate profits are the fuel that makes stocks go higher. And right now, over the last 20 years, corporate profit growth has actually outstripped the growth in the stock market. And that's a big deal. It's an indication to me that this trend is going to continue on into the future because of the economic growth and the tax cuts, and that this market can go higher from these levels. Sorry to be switching around though. And then this tax reform. We've already talked about that. That's a big deal, and I want to stress, not just a big deal for this year, but it's a big deal going forward. When you cut corporate taxes from the 30+% rate down to the 21% type rate, you put money directly into the bottom line of corporations. There's not an accounting gimmickry associated with that. It is a straight up increase in earnings and cash flow by the amount of the tax cut. Very, very big deal, and it's going to happen in the future as well as this year. So, we believe that the financial asset of choice right now is common stocks. Now, don't go back to your investment advisor and say, Mark said don't buy any bonds, because there's a place for bonds in portfolio too. But at this level of interest rates, it's more of a diversification effort than anything else. Anybody who thinks we're going to get a double-digit return out of a 2.6% 5-year, I've got some farmland someplace I need to sell you. Financial asset of choice is common stocks right now. And not just U.S. stocks. Overseas actually has lower valuation than we do right now. So, common stocks are the asset of choice, even though we've experienced a lot of volatility here recently. What does this mean for the fixed income markets? Well, the reason I asked you all if you thought interest rates were going up is because I wanted to get your feedback, because I'm pretty sure they're going to go up on short-term interest rates. Whether long-term interest rates go up by the same amount of short-term interest rates, I'm not sure, because there are some moderating factors that I think are going to affect longer-term interest rates. But I don't think bondholders are going to fare as well as stockholders over the next couple of years. Why do I feel that way? Well, the Federal Reserve has kind of promised us, first of all, that they're going to be increasing interest rates, short-term interest rates, and they're going to unwind all of that quantitative easing that they did. Everybody remember back in 2009 and 2010 where they had 2 rounds where they bought a whole bunch of bonds to put liquidity into the system and try to moderate the effects of the recession. They expanded their balance sheet by a huge number. Normally the Federal Reserve keeps about $400 to $500 million in fixed income. We're looking at maybe $2.5 to $3 trillion in fixed income on their balance sheet right now. And they had promised that they're going to stop reinvesting the income those bonds produce, and they're going to stop reinvesting the maturities of those bonds, and they're going to start selling some of those bonds to unwind that portfolio. What will this do to the fixed income market? Well, we're going to decrease the demand because the Fed's not buying anymore, and we're going to increase the supply. And those of you who've had Economics 101 know that means that prices are probably going to be hurt, and yields are probably going to go up. Higher inflation expectations. Probably the single most important factor that affects bond holders is inflation. Investors in bonds get a fixed income return, right? What they're trying to do is get something that's over and above inflation. We call it an inflation premium. So if the yield on that 5-year treasury is 2.6% and the inflation rate is 1.8, we're getting an inflation premium of 0.8%. Why do we want that if you're a bondholder? Because it helps to protect your purchasing power in inflationary periods. We don't want to lose purchasing power from the fixed returns that we're getting off of that bond. Make sense? Now, if inflation does go up, and I will tell you we're seeing some wage price pressure right now, that has generally been a precursor of increased inflation in the future. Inflation goes up, bond yields go up, and prices go down. So owners of that 2.6% 5-year treasury, if the inflation rate goes to 3%, suddenly are going to be in the red. Faster economic growth. One of the things that happens when we have faster economic growth is the demand for capital goes up. And as the demand for capital goes up, it becomes more expensive, right? Supply and demand thing again. So that's a main reason that we think interest rates are going up as well. I think this economy is going to grow to the extent that there's going to be people searching for capital out there, and the demand is going to go upward, and that's going to cause an increase in interest rates. And then the low level of interest rates right now. Why did I include that in this? Because at these low levels of interest rates, it doesn't take much of an increase in interest rates for you to wipe out a lot of the income you're receiving. That 2.6% 5-year treasury, if interest rates go up 1%, you've lost about 18% of the value of the bond in the price change. So it's pretty quick to wipe out almost all of the income with a decline in price. Now sure, if you hold it to maturity, you're going to get your money back. But institutional investors like Stockyards Bank, we have to come in and talk to you on every quarter and 6 months and tell you what your performance is. And when the bond markets go down, people don't really understand that very well, because the bonds are the stable part of the portfolio, right? That's the safety net. That's the diversification part of the portfolio. And we've been in a 30-some-odd-year bull market for bonds. People aren't used to seeing losses there. Make sense? Okay, I think there's some moderating factors that may keep longer rates a little bit lower. We're not going to see as much of an increase there as we are in the short-term rates. The first is low foreign rates. There are many countries in Europe and Scandinavia that have on their 5-year government bonds a 0% yield. And capital flows pretty fluidly throughout the world now. So, given a choice, if you're a European investor or a Japanese investor or a Chinese investor, of owning the Swiss 5-year bond that has a 0% yield, or the 2.6% yield in the US Treasury, I think a lot of people are going to pick that 2.6% yield in the US Treasury. And that will help soak up some of the supply that the Federal Reserve is putting out there. Productivity gains. I mentioned that already. We are seeing, as a result of some of the increased spending on the business side, productivity gains, not only from the worker, but from the manufacturing area as well. That has the tendency to completely offset inflation in instances like this. So inflation goes up, if productivity goes up, it offsets that to some extent. The high level of debt. A recurring theme with me because it's one of my big bugaboos. Our debt now is at a $20 trillion level. It doesn't take much of an increase in interest rates to really have an impact on the cost of servicing that debt, paying the interest and paying the principal. About 40% of our debt comes due in about 3 years. So anything the Federal Reserve does is going to have a pretty immediate impact on the budget deficit. And I think Congress is very reluctant to see these huge budget deficits. They were going to do everything that they can to try and moderate the Federal Reserve and to moderate what happens in the fixed income markets on the longer end in particular. Because the longer end really has more of an impact on us, on what we get on our bond yields, what we have to pay on our mortgage payments, that sort of thing. The Fed funds rate that the Fed is manipulating really only affects financial institutions. So I think Congress is going to do everything they can to moderate these rate increases because they don't want the budget deficits to balloon. The other thing they do not want to happen is for this economy to slide back into a recession. And I think that there's a very big risk of that if the Federal Reserve moves too quickly. And that's kind of the worry with the Federal Reserve right now. This promise that they've made to reduce their balance sheet and to increase short-term interest rates, with this high level of debt, they have a very narrow path that they have to walk. If they move too quickly increasing interest rates, they snuff off the economic growth. If they move too slowly, they create inflation. And because of all this debt, there's sort of an asymmetry taking place. They took interest rates down to 0 after the last recession, and we only got 2% growth. It may be that because of all this debt that we have, that it won't take a big increase in interest rates to really have an impact on economic growth in the future. Make sense? Because we'll have to spend more and more money servicing the debt. It'll be a bigger portion of our budget, and we will have less to spend on things like social programs and defense. Make sense? I keep turning this the wrong way. I'm going the wrong way. Forgive me. So what could go wrong? So that I won't lose my Dr. Doom designation, I'm going to throw a few things out there that could disrupt all of this. And the first is geopolitical risk. We have a lot going on geopolitically right now. Korea, big problem. South China Sea with China. What's going on in the Middle East? And I will throw another geopolitical risk out there that you may not be thinking of. Terrorist attack and cyber terrorist attack. The big thing right now is cyber terrorism. If you've been to an SYB on the road, our President Jay talks about the risk of cyber terror attack and how we get our firewalls tested maybe 2-3 times a day. Businesses are being infiltrated by cyber terrorism. And I think that's the biggest risk that we're experiencing right now. If we have another terrorist attack on U.S. soil, a la 9/11, if we have a shooting war someplace like in Korea, we're going to take all our bets off the table. Not that we're going to sell stocks, but that we're going to rethink this economic growth scenario that's positive that I've put forth. And the reason is because it would really hamper all of this optimism that the Trump program has put forth, that people are experiencing, that businesses are experiencing. So the geopolitical risks are very real. And who here's been hacked? A credit card or something like that? Lots of hands. Okay, the people that are doing this are very patient. They get into your computer systems or your phone even, and they wait for opportune times. So they're very sophisticated, and once that money disappears in the form of a wire transfer, it's gone. So if you're a business owner, I would say you need to have somebody come in and audit your systems. And you all need to be very careful about only calling the 800 number on the back of your credit card and not answering emails that look kind of funny. Because that's something that is very prevalent right now. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. This national debt. I've already talked a little bit about it. Our national debt is now $20 trillion. It's the same size as our GDP will be this year, 20 trillion. There is an economic body of thought that says when your GDP gets to about 1-to-1 ratio or above with your debt, when the debt gets to be the same size or bigger than your GDP, you put a permanent anchor on your economic growth. And it's for the very reason I mentioned, so much of the budget has to go to service that debt, that there's less of it available to do things like social programs, defense, and other necessary things. So this national debt's a big deal. I'm hoping that we'll get some work done on that and slow down the growth of government at least, so that we can get our arms around that. And I'm hopeful that we'll get economic growth that's fast enough that it will create enough revenue to kind of slow down the growth of government and the growth of the deficit as well. Federal Reserve actions. We've already talked a little bit about this. I cannot stress enough how narrow the path is that the Fed has to walk. Federal Reserves and central banks throughout history have been very, very good at throwing money at economic problems to try and shorten recessions and get the economy growing again. What they're not so good at is unwinding everything. And with all this debt that we have, it's going to be a neat trick for the Fed to do that. I think they're very aware of the dilemma that they're in, but it's still going to be a very tight, narrow path that they're going to have to walk. Congress. Why do I mention Congress? Because we've been at an impasse for a long time in Congress. It seems like the political parties are going further and further apart, and that's kind of a good thing because there's less legislation that comes out and less unintended consequences of the legislation that they produce. But I think Congress has been reluctant to acquiesce and go through some of the programs that the Trump administration wants to put forth. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think I have a cynical reason that I think smaller government threatens their sources of wealth and power and control. But I think there are also people that feel that there is going to be environmental damage if we grow at a faster rate. There are people that think that if we grow at a faster rate, we're somehow robbing lesser developed countries because the economic pie is finite. And I can tell you that nothing is further from the truth. The economic pie just keeps getting bigger. So I think Congress could disrupt some of this by failing to enact some of the initiatives that the Trump administration is putting forward that are all designed to increase economic growth, because there are some vested interests that don't want economic growth or success. And then the final thing that's been in the news here recently is tariffs. The President came out this morning and kind of moderated his stance on the aluminum and steel tariffs that he's talked about. And tariffs are basically just a tax on imported products from other countries. And I think that this is part of the art of the deal for Trump, that he has thrown out the possibility of having tariffs because he wants to force many of our trading partners back to the negotiation table and rework something like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. I'm hopeful that that's the case. The reason that tariffs could destroy what we've got going on here, or mess up what's going on here, destroy is too strong a word. If you remember your history, one of the things that precipitated the Great Depression and made it last as long as it did is countries all over the world began to protect their industries by putting tariffs in place, taxes on imported goods, and that brought world trade to a halt. And that was one of the many reasons that we had such a deep depression in the 30s, and it lasted so long. We really didn't come out of the depression that started after the market crashed in 29 until World War II. So a lot of economists and even market participants, when the word tariffs came up and the announcement came the other day that he was looking at aluminum and steel tariffs, panicked and said, oh my God, we're going to get in a world trade war, and there's nothing worse for economic growth on a global basis than trade wars. So tariffs could hurt things. I'm going to try and go the right way this time. And I did. Okay. I'm going to address some of the volatility that we've experienced recently. And I'm going to try and set your mind at ease about this, because I think what we've been experiencing is really kind of normal. Let's get interactive again. Who here couldn't sleep after the 1,032-point drop on February the 5th? Who panicked after that? Who was upset? Oh, come on, you got to admit it. Okay. Okay. That was a big deal. It was the single biggest point drop that we've had on the New York Stock Exchange ever. But it didn't even crack the top 40 in terms of percentage declines in the market. And in fact, if you look back at time, we have had 43 times since 1950 where the market has dropped 4% or more in a single day. This is what I call a power slide. If you're a customer, you've probably seen something similar to this. We just updated it. What do you think the one-year return was 365 days after that 4% or bigger decline? Just under 21%. So, if you were panicked by a 4% drop in the market, which was what that 1,032-point drop was, you need to hang in there. And the reason is because of the 42 times where we have 1 year's worth of data, There were only 6 times where we had a negative return 1 year in the future, and the average return was almost 21%. Many times, the best trading days happen immediately after some of those kind of catastrophic days, like that 1,032-point drop that we had. Okay. How often do we have those types of drops? Well, in a secular bull market, it's not unusual to have declines of from 5 to 20%. In fact, since about World War II or 1945, we've had 77 drops of from 5 to 10%. The average decline has been 6%. The average length of time it took for that 6% to happen down was 1 month, and you generally got your money back in 1 month. So, a well-diversified portfolio losing from 5 to 10% in one of these market corrections generally does pretty well and snaps back almost immediately from the decline. Well, let's take it a step further. What about a 10 to 20% decline? We've had 27 of those since World War II. The average decline has been about 14%. It happens in 4 months, and the recovery to your original value, 4 months. So that's why I say in a secular bull market, declines of between 5 and 20% are not irregular. They're the norm. Let's take it a step further. What about a 20 to 40% decline? We had 8 of those since World War II. The average decline is 27%. The average time it took to get that 27% down was 11 months, and the time it took you to get all your money back was 14 months. So even a decline of from 20 to 40%, the snapback is pretty quick. Now let's talk real bad bear markets. 40% or more down. We've had 3 of those since World War II. The average decline has been 51%. The average length of the decline was 22 months, and it took you almost 5 years to get your money back. Sounds pretty horrible, right? I will tell you that declines of over 30% have only happened when we have been in the middle of a recession, whether we knew it yet or not. And I see no signs on the horizon that we are in the process of experiencing a recession anytime in the next 12 to 18 months. So, I conclude from this that what we're experiencing volatility-wise is some of these normal 5 to 20% corrections in a secular bull market. No one can time the market. It's going to be one of the things I talk to you about when we go over this 40 years of experience that I've had, unfortunately. Those of you who are customers have seen this slide before. If you've been in the market for the last 20 years, you've had a return on average annually of about 8%. If you missed the 30 best trading days in that 20-year period of time, your return drops to 0. So, what do you do if you're experiencing and having a hard time with this 5 to 20% type corrections that we have in normal bull markets? Well, you probably need, if you're not sleeping at night, you probably do need to address your asset allocation. But for the vast majority of the people who have a time horizon that's long enough and a tolerance for risk that's big enough, what you need to do is hang in there for these things. Because if you try to get out, you are inevitably going to miss one of those 30 good or several of those 30 good days that make all the difference in performance over a long period of time. Does everybody feel better or worse? Better? Please tell me better. Okay. Okay. The title of the speech. Minding the Markets. I started an investment business in December of 1976. So this fall, I will be 42 years of doing what we do. Managing people's money, analyzing investment securities, and trying to figure out a proper asset allocation for clients. building relationships with clients. That's what we do at Stockyards Bank. I have had, I'm going to give you 5 or 6 truisms that I have found to be the case, based on my experience, that you're not going to read about in textbooks, that have made a difference in people's performance and my own personal performance. The first truism that I'm going to tell you is that dividends are important. This is XYZ Corporation. It's an actual company in the Stockyards Bank portfolio right now. I've changed the names to protect the innocent and to appease our attorneys. The current dividend yield on that stock is 1.8%. The earnings estimates 2018, 2019, and 2020, it's a big blue chip company, so there are a lot of analysts that have fairly certain expectations in terms of the earnings on this company. The dividend 5 years ago was $1.94. Today it's $6.84. It's one of those stocks that kind of represent the type of stock that we put in portfolios at Stockyards. The compound annual growth of the dividend has been 28%. They have a stated payout ratio of between 40 and 50%. So, let's assume you buy the stock today, and let's just go 2 years into the future, to 2020. And let's assume that they pay out the mid-range of that payout ratio. 45% of their earnings will go into dividends. Your yield on the cost becomes 2.6%, which is about the yield on a 5-year treasury, right? Let's assume, too, that you've got a longer time horizon in assumption 2, 5 years. And let's assume that they don't grow the dividend in the future 28%. Let's assume they grow it at 14. And you buy and hold that stock for 5 years. Your yield on your cost will be 4%. Now let's assume a best case scenario. And assume 5 years into the future, and they continue to grow that dividend at a 28% rate. Your yield on your cost in 2023 is going to be 7%. Who here would like to own a stock for 5 years and have a 7% income return on your cost? Okay. Let's take this a step further and talk about that 5-year treasury that yields 2.6%. Who wants the 5-year treasury yielding 2.6%, even in this volatile market? And who wants XYZ Corporation? Who wants the 5-year treasury? Oh my God, we've got consensus. That's maybe a good thing. Who wants XYZ? Okay. Dividends have been and always will be an important part of the total return from stocks. Investors benefit from the power of compounding that takes place in companies like XYZ Corporation. And when you buy high-quality companies, which is one of the things we're going to talk about here in just a second, that do things like this with their dividend for shareholders, all you have to do is buy and kind of hang on. Because eventually the growth in the dividend is going to bail you out, even if you pay too much for the stock. Make sense? Valuation matters. And I talk about paying too much for a stock. It's easy to do that. If you buy the stock market when the PE ratio is above 20 times, you're probably going to end up with a low single-digit return over the next 10 years. When you buy in the mid-teens to upper teens to lower teens, the return goes up pretty dramatically. And that's one of the reasons that at Stockyards Bank, we have this quantitative screening model, but we also try and look very hard at the historical trading range of the stocks that we buy. And we try to buy them when they're trading at valuation levels that would indicate that you're going to get a return that's going to be something better than lower single digits. So valuations matter. Price is what you pay for stock. Value is what you get, to quote Warren Buffett and some of the members of the investment team. And what we're trying to do is pay a price that gives you a value. Make sense? A lot of people, I think, tend to chase fads. They chase momentum stocks, they chase stocks that are fads, that take whatever's hot, whatever somebody's selling at the time, and expect to have good returns. They buy and sell, and they eat up their trading profit with taxes and transaction costs. No one can time this market. You've heard me say that over and over again in this speech alone. The good news is you don't have to. This chart shows the risk of a market loss over time. When you're looking at the top bar chart, you see about 74% of the time you get a positive return, about 26% a negative return. If you look at the middle range, we're looking at 5-year expectations. The 5-year expectation is more of an 86% chance of the market giving you a positive return over 5 years. Who here has a 15-year time horizon? Oh, come on. I'm old and I got a 15-year time horizon. Let's look at the bottom chart, which looks at 15-year rolling returns. And we started in 1926, so we include the Great Depression. So from 1926 to 1941, 1927 to 1942, all the way up to 2018. How many times have we had a negative return from 15 years of being in the stock market? The answer is 0. Okay, so the bad news is you can't time the market. The good news is you don't have to. You need to buy higher quality securities like XYZ Corporation at reasonable prices and hang on to them. That's the reason our turnover at Stock Yards Bank in the wealth management area has averaged about 25% on an annual basis. We stay in for the long haul. We've held stocks that we've had in the portfolio for the entire 24 years that I've been at the bank. Because nothing has changed in terms of the fundamentals, and we want this power of compounding and the power of the U.S. stock market and economy to work for us. Make sense? Quality wins over time. Another quote from Warren Buffett and his crew: if there is such a thing as a free lunch in the stock market, it's quality. This chart shows the returns on an annual basis and for 15 years from various different styles of investing. We've got value investing, momentum investing, large cap investing, and the red box, which is quality investing. And we define quality at Stock Yards Bank as companies with consistent earnings and sales growth, companies with clean balance sheets, conservative financials, good cash positions, companies that have high return on equity from positive sources, mainly asset utilization and profit margins. We like companies that are efficient users of capital. We like companies that have competitive advantages and are moated businesses. They have things in place that keep people from competing with them. We like dividend payers and growers, and we like shareholder-friendly management. If you look at that red square, it's never at the top. It's never in the bottom. But it's in the top third of all of those investment styles up there. And when you look over longer time horizons, like that 15 years that we just discussed, the difference in return is pretty significant between quality and those other styles. And that's why at Stock Yards Bank, we tend to use quality companies that have those characteristics. Because over the long run, you benefit from it. Even the second best value, it beats by 1.4% or so. And 1.4% compounded over 15 years is a pretty big number. That's my last tip for you all. So the good news is you can't time the market. Bad news is you can't time the market. The good news is you don't have to. And if you follow some of these things that I've experienced over the last 40 years. The last thing I want to do is thank you all for being here today on a cold, kind of snowy March morning. The other thing I want to do is tell you that if you're a customer, we cannot tell you how much we appreciate your business. You are our business reason for being. If you're a prospect and you like what you've heard today from some of the people that have spoken, please come and see us. We'd love to do business with you. It's been a great place to work over the last 24 years. Stock Yards Bank has been a fantastic place where I kind of realized my best destiny in terms of doing investment work. And the good Lord willing, we'll all be here next year to do this again. Thank you.